All right, welcome. Thank you everyone for coming today. We really appreciate it. My name is Jennifer Andrews and I am the director here at the Lyon County Museum. And I have just a few words here to say that I'm going to pass the microphone to Bill Palmer, who is president of the Lyon County Historical Society Board of Directors. Welcome, thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it. First of all, I want to say thank you to Paul Evanson, who is our collections manager. He and I put a lot of work into the exhibit along with Bill and our veterans, and we had some help. So I want to recognize Bernie Doulis, Lee Rasky, Rick Banbury, Dan Markell for helping with moving lumber, exhibit construction, painting, and of course all of our veterans who helped with the exhibit. Many of you are in the room today. You helped us by sharing your stories, your photographs, your input on the exhibit of how it should look like. Your feedback was very much appreciated, and it still is. So as you look through the exhibit today, please let us know if there's anything we can add, what you thought about it. Your feedback is very much appreciated. We have comment cards that are located by the refreshments, or you can tell us in person. We really want to strive to make the exhibits here at the museum professional and pleasing, and these are your stories that we are sharing. We want to make sure we're doing it right. In exhibits, we want to always make sure our exhibits are professional looking, have technology. So please consider being a member of the museum or contributing a donation. Our membership dollars go fully towards exhibits, programs, and preservation here at the museum. We do have membership forms by the refreshments in a donation jar. But thank you so much for coming today, and I'm going to pass it on to Bill, who's going to say a few words here before he introduces our panel of veterans today. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'll add my welcome and thank you for all those who joined us this afternoon. It's a delight to see all your faces out there. And I want to add to Jennifer's words, too, about our contributing Vietnam veterans. You guys are the foundation and the heart of what this exhibit is all about. We wouldn't be able to share these stories without your willingness to share your experiences with us. And in many cases, your photographs, artifacts, and you are the folks who have populated this exhibit, and we just thank you so much for that. And of course, Jennifer has run away because she is a very humble person, but she is the curator of this exhibit. That means we rely on her expertise to figure out how to configure the stories, how to share the images, how to assemble them in a way that helps you all as visitors understand the stories that we're sharing. And so, Jennifer, thank you so much. And by the way, I've witnessed myself her arm wrestling our exhibit technology to get it into working condition for us. Before we turn to sort of a panel of our Vietnam vets here who have agreed to share some thoughts with you today, I want to recognize some of our contributing veterans who cannot be with us today because they've passed away. And so today I want us to think in a special way of Cy Molitor, Millrow High School class of 1949. He was a U.S. Air Force loadmaster with the 315th Air Commando Wing at Phan Rang Air Base from November 67 to November 68. I'd like us to remember also Bill Furin, Marshall High School class of 1962, an Army infantryman with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in the Central Highlands of Vietnam from May 1968 to May 1969. We also remember in a special way today Raleigh Dale, Marshall High School class of 1960, who was an Air Force aircraft mechanic with the 64 41st Tactical Fighter Wing. I'm an Army soldier, I'm not used to those long numbers. He was TDY to Tak Lee Air Base in Thailand early in 1966. I also want to remember in a special way Norm Nelson, Cottonwood High School class of 1960, an Army infantryman with the 4th Infantry Division in the Central Highlands of Vietnam from July 1966 to April 1967. Those of you who served there and you're scratching your head, you know why he wasn't there for a full year. He was injured there and evacuated. We also remember in a special way Sharon Johnson McCulley, Russell High School class of 1957, who was a U.S. Air Force flight nurse with the 903rd Aeromedical Evacuation Wing at Cameron Air Base from May 1970 to May 1971. We have the pleasure of serving with her sister, Pam Bush, on the board of directors. And we recently lost Dave Zimke, Tracy resident, Tracy High School attendee. He was an Army field wireman with the 1st Infantry Division in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, December 1967 to December 1968. And then he returned to Vietnam for a second tour as an NCO at Cam Ranh Base in the summer of 1970 to 1971. So those are some special folks. We can keep them in our hearts. They too contributed to our exhibit. I also want to share with you all, we have some special guests today. Deb Amon, her brother Dick and his family. They represent a Gold Star family from Minnesota. Those who are not familiar with the Gold Star program, they lost their brother Tom to enemy action in Vietnam. He was an Army infantryman with the 25th Infantry Division, killed in action June 19th, 1969. Some of our contributing vets agreed to share some thoughts about the exhibit, and I'm going to introduce each one of them in turn and then ask them to rotate up here and take my seat, and we'll play musical chairs together. First we have George Seldat, who served as a United States Army Intelligence non-commissioned officer at Nha Trang Base. I chose George to lead this off because it was his idea. He said to me basically, you know, we're gathering all these people today, we should have some kind of program while we're here. So, George, come on up. You can sit or stand, whatever.
So he's going to blame me for this, okay? So.
Assessing responsibility is always important.
Thank you for coming. Bill deserves a great deal of credit, so I'd like to simply say that thank you for what you've done. It's tremendous. And Jennifer, oh, there you are. You've done a great job here, and I can't tell you enough that it's wonderful. I couldn't imagine it at the beginning. I wasn't sure what it was going to look like, but it looks great. It's fabulous. Good work. Just a quick couple of comments because obviously there are a lot of people here who want to say a few things. The exhibit that I brought down and Jennifer and I worked with and we got it set up was that I had an opportunity to teach while I was in Nha Trang, and which was my base camp. And when I had the time off from work, that I would basically go down to the school at St. Joseph's Mission, and that information is actually on the brick wall on the other side over there. And met a gentleman, his name was Father Francis, and he asked me if I would be interested in helping out with teaching. And I said sure, and he reminds me a lot of an Irish priest. In other words, he had his wire-rimmed glasses and down on his nose, he'd look over the top of them, and you knew that whatever was going to happen, you were going to do what he wanted you to do. So anyway, I ended up teaching an English class, and I had to tell him, I said, Father Francis, you know, my grades in college for English were not that good. But he said, they're better than the kids here. Okay, so anyway, I taught a class occasionally with these students. And then he also said, you know, we need an art teacher. And I said, I'm an economist, okay. So not an artist, but he said, well, I see that you took some courses in graphic arts. And I said, I did. And so anyway, I said, you'll do fine because you know more than the kids do again. So anyway, that began an opportunity for me to help these young boys. The mission itself was a boys' school, and it was run by Franciscan monks. They were all Vietnamese. Father Francis was Vietnamese as well. And they had a gift for art and a gift for expression, more than I could give to them. So I think I gained a lot from that, and I gave them an assignment, and you'll see that assignment in the drawings over on the wall over there. Please take a look at them. These are young kids. They were young kids at that time, in their teens, early teens, and there's a lot being expressed in the work that they did. And I hope you can see some of that, and if you see something that you are kind of curious about and want to share that with me, that would be great. But that was my experience. I wanted to bring that into the display here because we've got there are a lot of heroes here, all right? Well, and I just can't say that enough. They really are. I know where a lot of these guys were over in Vietnam. They were in some pretty tough places. And I think we simply need to honor them. And if you can do that, please do. Speak to them and say thanks for their service. Thank you.
Next, I'm going to call Dan Didsetter up. Dan was an Army infantryman with the 9th Infantry Division down in the Mekong Delta. Dan, could you share some thoughts about how you participated in the exhibit and why?
Okay, Bill, actually I'd forgotten I'd agreed to do this.
Then your comments will be from the heart.
I want to emphasize, there's nothing special about me. There's nothing special about anything I did or didn't do. You could talk to anybody out here and get stories, and they'll all have a story to tell. Since I got back in Vietnam, I've been involved with the Honor Guard in our town. And I'm not even from Lyon County, so I'm sort of out of place here, but I'm close, just a few miles away. But Cammy Porter, our Honor Guard, been helping with it for years. And I've helped bury a lot of veterans. And the stories are gone after they're in the ground. Nobody can tell their stories now. And so when I heard about this exhibit, I thought about that. And I thought, you know, maybe some of these stories should be told. Maybe some of this should get passed on. And I think you got to filter out a little bit what you tell. Because some things, you know, probably shouldn't be told. But so that's kind of how I got interested. And a couple of years ago, Bill came out and did an interview. And I know he'd done this because the Marshall paper runs these every week. And several people from Canby area had their interviews, and those were in the paper, I think, over the years. And so I thank Bill for doing that. And they've been running stories about me the last few times, and I've been gotten quite a lot of comments from the community. And actually, I was quite apprehensive about that. I wasn't sure how people were going to see that, because I think our concern is, I had a neighbor that was a couple houses down from me in Porter that was a Korean War veteran. And he wrote down a bunch of his stuff, and his daughter kind of helped him put it together in a book. And so I sat and read that because he was my neighbor. He's gone now. And he wrote something in there that I think I really could identify with. He said, everybody feels guilty. He was in Korea, but he wasn't on the front lines. He was in I think they took care of fuel, haul fuel and pump fuel and that sort of thing. He said, I feel guilty about that because he said, you know, I wasn't in the front lines in combat. And he said, the guys that were in the front lines in combat but never got hit, they feel guilty because they didn't do what the guys did that got hit. So when it comes down to it, the only people that don't feel guilty are dead. So who's going to tell these stories? Because they can't. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to call on Carl Porish next. Carl is a minority among our regional Vietnam veterans because his service in Vietnam was in the Marine Corps. Now, the rest of us have pretty much forgiven him for that. But Carl served as a pilot of a CH-46 Sea Knight. These are medium-lift helicopters. And he served at Marble Mountain Air Base near Da Nang, which is in the northern part of South Vietnam. Carl?
Well, thank you, Bill. It's hard to visualize it for myself. I got there in September of 1970, and the war was kind of winding down then. And 7 months later, President Nixon. Oh, okay. 7 months later, President Nixon started, I think they called it Keystone Bravo Oriole, where they started removing all of the Marines out of the Da Nang area. So when I left, I think there were 11 rifle companies left in the Da Nang area. But anyway, I got there, like I said, in September 70. I was 25 years old, and the first thing you see in the exhibit is the odor that existed in Vietnam, and everybody I've talked to says the same thing. But I was involved in complete support of the Marines that were on the ground. We did day and night medevacs, we did resupplies, troop inserts and extracts and those types of things. And so, and I would, when Bill got in touch with me about contributing to the thing, Vietnam had a very profound effect on my life. It's really hard not to be in that situation in Vietnam and what you witnessed and everything else that doesn't have an impact on your life. And so, like Dan and I think are the only two folks that were in the aviation part of the war. He flew the CH-47 and I did the 46. And so I wanted to, the reason I wanted to get involved was to at least portray some of the things that the aviation units did. And I think I contributed a few maps and things, and then also the operator's manual for the CH-46. And so, anyway, but I was very happy that Bill asked me to contribute, and I hope everybody takes a good look at the exhibit because it's really been a nice piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. One thing I probably should have said earlier was that Jennifer and I and Paul convened a number of, we called them Veterans Roundtables, to help us, guide us during the course of our preparing this exhibit. So every gentleman who's up here, except Norman, participated in one or more roundtables, and they helped guide the exhibit, what kinds of things we should talk about in the exhibit, what kind of stories to share, and that was a very generous commitment of their time to help us out. Our next veteran is Royal Hetling. Royal Hetling was a U.S. Air Force security police dog handler at Cam Ranh Air Base in Vietnam. Royal?
Oh, once again, I'd kind of like to thank Jennifer, Bill, and let's not forget Paul back there. I guess his name's been mentioned a few times, but probably not quite often enough. When Bill asked me if I'd get up and say a few words there, I said, yeah, I will. But then when my wife keeps asking me, what are you going to talk about? I said, well, I don't know, but I'll think of something at the time. But each time when I stop to think what am I going to say, my mind goes off in different directions each time. But viewing the displays here this morning, I can't help but think of one major item that goes through my mind. Our generation, we were the baby boomers. We can relate to World War II much better than the generation today can relate to Vietnam. And we have to remember that Vietnam is now 50 years in our past. It's now fading in our nation's memory. So displays like this is important to for young people to start learning about what happened back then. And so we need to keep that memory alive in some way. And so this is one way that we can keep that memory alive. Now also too, as I was walking through there this afternoon, I can't help but think 58,248 of our young men did not come home. And we need to remember that those guys were between the ages of 18 and 22 years old. And we have to remember that they never had the opportunity to really live their life. And what we lost from those people, we cannot forget. What they could have contributed, was lost forever. And so we need to remember that. And also too here, you guys will all probably agree with me here too, that we need to keep this going in some manner, way, or form. And we need to start educating our young people so they do not forget. And I don't know how else we can do this, but to keep displays like this going, and we need to start talking more about it too. And I always tell young people today too, that do not be afraid to walk up to your older veterans and ask them about his military service. He may be a little reluctant at first, but remember, he was a witness to history. He was a part of a historical event. Please consider talking to him one way or another. Because I remember talking to one person. He was a World War II vet. He was at Pearl Harbor. I remember asking him one night if he'd tell me about Pearl Harbor, and he did. And I found that to be very interesting. So I started talking to more and more people about their past. And I found out that they were very willing to discuss it. So I tell young people today, do not be afraid to walk up to a vet and ask him about what did he do. And I keep telling them that's my message to young people today. And so I don't know what more I can add, Bill.
Thank you, Royal.
Next up, we have Mr. Dan Markell. Dan was a crew chief on CH-47 Chinook helicopters. He was stationed at Canto Army Airfield in the Mekong Delta area.
I want to thank Bill and Jennifer and Paul for getting all this organized. My only part on this was taking some plywood here, give it a cut, and then bring it back. I also have a few things on display, and Carl and I can kind of share an inside joke, because if you take a look at one of these items, you probably don't know what it is. It's a Lord mount. Okay. As Bill said, I was a crew chief on a Chinook. We basically, we were kind of like a freightliner. We hauled everything. We hauled ammunition, we hauled food, we hauled cement, we hauled troops, we'd evacuate villages. And like most of the guys here, there's not a day that goes by that they don't remember being in Vietnam, even though it was 55 years ago. It's something you never forget. Some of the experiences, some of the time it was some of the things are I get kind of emotional about it once in a while, but when we we got in country, first thing that happened the first night, I thought we were getting mortared, but it was actually outgoing artillery from our artillery people. And I want to mention something about artillery and infantry. These guys are the real heroes, because we would fly in, drop our load, and probably blow away most of their tents and things, and then go. So if anybody in here has been in the armor, or artillery or infantry, you've got my you've got my admiration. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dan.
We have one more sort of scheduled speaker here, and that's Mr. Norman Tigan. Norm was a U.S. Army chaplain's assistant with the 1st Aviation Brigade, which was the senior headquarters of Dan's unit.
And he was also my English teacher.
And he was at Sanford Army Airfield at Long Bend. Norm?
Thank you. I prepared some remarks today, but I left them underneath the chair. I want to thank all of you for coming together and for this exhibit. I'm really not a Lyon County guy. I'm a Blue Earth County guy. I just happened to be a high school English teacher at Marshall High School from January 1965 to June 1968. And during that period of time, I ran out of teaching deferments and educational deferments. And so I celebrated my 26th birthday in Fort Campbell Basic Combat Training. For those of you that were Marshall High School people or high school people at that time, I want to relate an anecdote from my teaching experience. I was a single teacher then, and single teachers then were asked to do chaperone duties for basketball games and what have you. And so we would travel to different places like Montevideo and Laverne and be on board. Well, all the time that I was at Marshall High, I was under the threat of going into the military. And every now and then I would have to leave for a day and go somewhere, and somehow we tried to keep it quiet from the students. And if you know the students of Marshall High School in those era or at any time, you know that very few secrets were kept. And so my secret came out into the open in a rather dramatic way. We were on a bus, I think we were going to Montevideo. And oh, do you remember there was a song back in those days called Hey Lily Lily? Hey Lily Lily Lily, hey Lily Lily Lo. Well, all of a sudden on this tour, all of a sudden, this beautiful voice, choir member, came back and he said, well, I know a teacher whose name is Tigan. Hey, lady, lady, lo, he will soon be in Saigon. Hey, lady, lady, lo. So, at any rate, I just wanted to encourage you to tell your stories. Tell your story to the Lyon County Historical Society. For many years, I was a volunteer at the Minnesota Historical Society, and that's where I learned that the state of Minnesota is very much interested in you, all of you. Your stories are very important. You may not think that what you did was important. I don't think my story is particularly interesting or important, but it's my story. And so my story then is a part of that. By the way, if I could tell one more story, most unusual anecdote that I've ever read involved General George Patton, who, as you recall, was the commander of the 3rd Army in World War II. And a lot of men died, and a lot more would have died had he not been commander. Well, at any rate, he had an aide. I was a chaplain assistant, I can relate to that. He had an aide who made sure that everything was right for General Patton, that the table was set, everything was just right. When all of a sudden at a press briefing, one of the reporters said, what's that fork doing in your pocket? Why do you have a fork in your pocket? And they said, well, General Patton is a perfectionist. Everything has to be perfect. His table has to be set perfectly. His food is just right. Everything is just right. And I use this fork to make sure that everything is kept clean for him, that nothing that I would touch would ever come in contact with what the general touched. So I take this fork and I make sure that his napkin is all right. Well, then one of the reporters said, well, what happens when you have to go to the latrine and take care of your business? says, I used my fork. Well, I wanted to encourage you. My story is in the Minnesota Historical Society. I sent it over here. It's the Blue Earth County Historical Society. I work for a chaplain. His son asked me to record some things, so I've sent it to his son. This pastor was a pastor in the Texas Lutheran Church. I've sent it out there. So my story is not very important, but it's gotten out. And you may feel that your story is not important, but it is important because you are important. You served your country, you did what you had to do, and thank you for it. And anytime anybody says thank you for your service, don't be afraid to say, oh, do you mind if I tell you my story? And then be prepared to give them just a short 30-second answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. And I was privileged, and some of you were back there at the time too, when Norm saw a former student who came up and gave him a hug when they saw one another for the first time in a long time. Are there any other Vietnam vets here today who would like to share a comment about the exhibit or anything that's significant or important to them that they'd like to talk about?
Gotta represent the women.
Absolutely. This is Pam Swinnis Barrows. She served as an Army nurse in Pleiku, Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
The only thing I really want to say is that it was a privilege to take care of you all, whomever I took care of. I was a brand new nurse. I learned by fire, trial by fire, and it was a privilege. And I like to tell folks that I started my career in nursing taking care of soldiers, and I ended it taking care of vets because I worked with the state veterans homes. So can't get much better than that.
And we're so pleased you drove down here to join us today.
Bill, can I tell a story about more women?
Please.
Wouldn't have thought of this until the other day. You guys remember the donut dollies?
Yeah, oh yeah.
There's a new book out about donut dollies in World War II, by the way. My wife just got done reading it. It was interesting. Anyway, I was a new guy, and I was at a pretty remote fire base, and get in from the field, and we went into the shower to get cleaned up, and the showers wasn't anything fancy. It was just a little bit, kind of some boards around it. It was completely open to the sky. It just had a couple of poles set up with nozzles on it. We heard a helicopter coming in. Didn't think anything of that. It happened all the time. This helicopter came over, and for whatever reason, we thought it was kind of strange, made a big turn right over the top of our shower. And we looked up, and here were two girls with blue skirts on. It was the donut dollies. And they waved at all these naked guys standing in the shower. So there were other women beside the nurses over there, too.
Oh, Dan, all I can say is that alone was worth the price of admission today. I just want to say again, thank you, in particular to all you vets who took that leap of faith when I called you, or when somebody encouraged you to get in touch with the museum. You took that leap of faith to say, yeah, I'll share some of my experience. Because when I do my interviews, I realize you're entrusting something of great significance to you, and you're entrusting it to me, and that I need to honor and respect that for what it is. You're entrusting something very significant to me. So we hope that we're doing justice to you. I'm going to wrap this up here, but I am going to piggyback on Jennifer's comments earlier, which is we do have comment cards back there by the treats. And please do give us some comments, give us some feedback. What works, what doesn't work? Is there something we're missing there that we should include? Yes, sir.
I'm from Texas up here. I used to live in Marshall, but there's something.
Welcome back, sir.
There's something that we got to add to this thing out here, and that's the Bob Hope tours that came to Thailand and Vietnam. They were so special to us. It was unbelievable because you know you're gone from home and you don't think of anything but the war. And when they came in there, they brought us hope that we could still enjoy our time with the American people that came over to give us the help that we needed, you know. That's one thing we should do, honor Bob Hope, because he was the only one that brought the people over there for us. And he was my hero as far as I'm concerned.
Well said, sir. Thank you. Those of you who are Vietnam veterans who were not a part of setting up the exhibit, you are still a part of the exhibit. And if you would like us to place a pin on that map of Vietnam to represent where you served, please get in touch with Jennifer or Paul or I, and we'll get the information we need and we'll add a pin to demonstrate where you served in Vietnam. And as Norm said, those of you who served, you have an important story. Whether you believe it's important or not, it is important. You served our nation, you served it in wartime, and I'm always open for business. So I am always willing to work with any veteran who's willing to work with me, be it a questionnaire, be it an oral history interview. I'm not shy about asking questions, and please don't be shy if you're interested in working with me. Let's see. I think that's about all I've got. But this was my hope with this exhibit. My hope was that this is your welcome home parade, that this is your thank you from your fellow citizens of Lyon County, that this is your opportunity to stand proud and say, I served. And I served with my brothers and sisters in arms. Thank you so much for your service, and thank you for coming here today. And please, take some time with the exhibit, talk with one another, and get to know one another, and don't hesitate to ask Paul or Jennifer or I questions. And by the way, we have treats way in the back there. If you haven't found them yet, make your way there. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming today.